if Madame Langle's right and story's the language of the heart, what's wild is we all speak it fluently.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us just don't speak it often.
Right.
Or some of us don't, listen to it well.
Mm.
And that's probably what if I had a hope of why we're podcasting this,
right?
It's to narrow the gap. It's to bridge the gap between, story and your life versus, maybe a life of academics and facts. With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoweh's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful inns for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome to the Exploring More podcast with Michael Thompson. That'd be me. And I'm hanging out with SJ.
Hanging out with SJ again.
And talking about, this is a good one, man. This has been on the list for a long time.
Yeah.
And
we've been wanting to talk about it.
I think you said this morning, let's do something a little less serious.
Or just, or just something that's more conversational. With the King Me book series, we had great intention, places we wanted to go, points we wanted to hit. This is more like if you could just imagine that you're sitting on Michael's back deck with us, this is the kind of conversation we'd have.
I think, or we're in the truck going somewhere, and did you see this? Hey, have you seen that?
Right.
So I'm giving away some of the pieces of this when what we're talking about is story.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus told stories.
Yeah.
And they are called parables, right? And when Jesus calls it something, all of a sudden it's kind of a holy thing. Like parables are really a big, really a big deal.
It gets the seal of approval.
It gets the seal of holiness on it because Jesus, So, what if he didn't? What if the word wasn't baptized? Well, what if somebody else uses that word? Would baptism be that sacred and holy a thing? If we. Yeah, I got to baptize my dog today, and
imagine if Jesus said, you must be immersed.
So immersion
so
has
no
this
sprinkling,
super holy
You're
class
not allowed to do that. Yeah, it's John the Immerser.
He said, yes. Yeah. so anyway, parables.
Anyway, yes.
And,
well, before we start sharing in even some of our favorites, modern day parables.
Yeah, I want to talk.
I want to talk about ones that Jesus used, but then also, ones the modern day parables. Like we at our weekends, we show movie clips and things.
We're heading there.
But why is story so important?
That's where that's why I want to bring up first.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Me too.
Great minds.
We didn't even talk about that until just now.
Just now. Great minds.
Amazing.
But we've been preparing for this one for years to to talk about this at the mic.
Sure.
And Madame Langle said, that story is the language of the heart. And
she wrote Babar.
She was a novelist.
Yeah. And
I don't know if she wrote a children's book.
Anyway, sorry.
That's
okay. To derail. Wait, but I have a device.
Yes, that can. If only we had something we could look something up really fast.
Yeah.
But you're in a class of characters now. The C.S. Lewis's and the Tolkien's, and I was thinking about
A Wrinkle in Time. She wrote that whole series of A Wrinkle in Time. I don't know why I thought about Babar.
But
she's an Madeline Langle.
Beatrix Potter.
Another one.
And all the Peter Rabbit stories. I mean, stories, right? They're with us. And when we use the term parable, we're saying it is another word for meaningful stories, stories that impact you, stories that somehow influence your you want to be like that character, or you don't want to be like that character,
or you are like that character, and somebody's trying to show you something, right? Like I think about that with Jesus, the way he utilized parables, and it's like you can say something directly, right? Like, or you can tell a story that illustrates the same thing, and it could be more relatable. Great line, because sometimes people don't get it. Yeah.
And that would be the case in Jesus's time. And, I have 3 daughters, and Robin, and we're always talking about, and especially in this day and age where there is so much content between Hulu and Netflix and Apple and, on and on. So we're sharing, right, the stories that we like. And there's based on a true story, based on, almost true stories. And then there's the characters that, I think it was Paul Young in an interview regarding the shack.
Yeah.
He was asked, is it a true story? And the response was something of the flavor of the spirit of, well, what they're asking me when they ask me if the shack is true is, did it really happen? And then Young said, no, it didn't really happen, but it nonetheless, it's true.
Right.
And so when that's the hook. I love that. And I believe that's kind of why we want to give some attention and validate this idea of story. And, we do a whole talk, if you will, at the weekends, men and women's weekends, Rendezvous Project, the larger story. Do you know, as a character in a story, do you know the larger story that your story's in? And so context and characters and their relationship, even when you have Dorothy stepping out of Kansas and into Oz, where are we? What is this place? I don't think we're in Kansas anymore.
Yeah.
And you see a lot of stories like that with Neo in the Matrix, the children in the Pevensey children into Narnia. So there are stories that, capture us, not because they necessarily really happened, but they are nonetheless true. Gandalf is a character that speaks the truth and guides his fellowship in many ways to this. He knows more.
And the truth is, we all want a Gandalf in our lives.
Right. In the hero's journey, absolutely. Yeah. There has to be that that guide that comes along, that encounter,
Morpheus.
That encounter with Morpheus or Miyagi or Terrence Mann. There's in the journey, the hero or heroine's journey, you have to find that, and it's almost, they're always written into that, and that's a great framework, right? The hero's journey, heroine's journey, that those elements and those pieces that not just move linearly, but they move, linearly like this, from side to side, yet still moving in a direction where...
Well, there's always a twist, right?
Always.
And oftentimes I was just thinking about, guides. We all long for a guide in our journey. And the guide always, at some point, ends up being the guided.
Oh, yeah, they have their stuff.
They have their learning moments, and like the wisdom of a hobbit, comes to the forefront, and or Neo shows something to Morpheus, or even Dorothy shows something to the Tin Man, along the way. And so it's I think too, Michael, part of why we resonate so much with these stories is that I think we see ourselves as the lead character in our story.
And that's the invitation of story, right? But yes.
So we want a relatable, series of events, or maybe to give us hope. I mean, I think there's stories that can give us hope, that, there is a path to follow. There is a way to go. There is a journey to go on. Also, even when the path doesn't lead the direction we want it to go, that we're hopeful for, that we're not alone in that. So there's so much to it, I think, than just like spending a couple hours in a movie theater.
Yeah. Yeah, so much. I mean, so the trick is, do you know why that moves you? Do you know what that character is offering you?
Yeah, for years and years, I'd go to a movie or watch some, even in the theater. I remember seeing Les Mis live for the first time. And feeling these feelings and having this emotion come up in me, or weeping, or just being filled with joy.
Yeah.
But then leaving it there. Right? Not exploring, not asking.
Yeah. Pondering that, what is
that about?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So seeing ourselves in the characters, that's another, that's a great, let's go back to that. I want to definitely go back to that. Because that starts to get into some real, what's my heart feeling? What's my relationship to that particular character? But keeping, the challenge, right, to stay up here in story and parables and illustrations and metaphors for our journey. And, nothing wrong with church. But I'll bet you most souls can give you 10 lines from movies from Caddyshack to Gladiator, and maybe not give you
Vacation,
and maybe not give you 10 verses.
Yeah.
So there's a power in this, and I'm not giving anybody demerits or anybody awards if you can. I'm just saying my point is the effect of these stories, and how we relate to the character, just that the impression that it leaves on us. So story, if Madame Langle's right, and story's the language of the heart, what's wild is we all speak it fluently. Some of us just don't speak it often.
Right.
Or some of us don't, listen to it well. And that's probably what if I had a hope of why we're podcasting this,
right?
It's to narrow the gap. It's to bridge the gap between, story and your life versus, maybe a life of academics and facts, which it was, I think it was C.S. Lewis, who has this great essay on the light in the tool shed. And I'd advise anyone and everyone to read that short, few page, maybe 1,000-word.
Yeah, maybe we can put a link in the description.
Yeah, but the light in the tool shed, and what he's doing in that essay is he's showing that, and he's talking about seeing a light. He's opening up the door of a tool shed, and he's seeing the light, and he's seeing the particles, and he's caught up in what he sees, it to the degree that it's affecting him in a what would I call it? I would say it's impacting him in a, he's awestruck. He's like,
yeah, it's like, oh, affecting him to his core.
Yeah, he's and then, as he writes the essay, he's talking about, and then I get out of the beauty he said, something shifts and I move from the beauty of observance to the analytical and the explanation. And when he moves there, the moment's gone. The effect of the beauty and what he's seeing, now he's trying to explain it and or understand it, which you can't not have both. But what Lewis is pointing out is that there is a moment when, and I've shared this story with you and some different audiences about the William Wilberforce story.
Yeah.
Amazing Grace.
Yeah.
And I am watching this and I am being, pulled, gravitationally pulled into this story in a time in my life. And at the end, when the vote comes in, hopefully this is not too big a spoiler. If you know Wilberforce's story in Amazing Grace, he's the MP.
The movie's been out a while, so it's like,
so
it's
if it's new to you, then you start with the end in mind. And here, the slave.
Make your point because I want you to tell the story when we come back from the break.
Okay, so the slave trade, the abolitionists, the early work in the United Kingdom. In Great Britain and how this how this story ends and what God actually was doing that I was in the tool, I was observing the light in the tool shed and experiencing it. And then, it ends, I'm in tears and I know when I'm in tears, God, what is this about? What's going on? Or then kind of that move towards analyzing and explaining and understanding and trying to sort it out, right? That's different than it impacting you. So after the break, we can finish that story. So we'll be right back on the Exploring More podcast.
Hi, I'm Robin Thompson.
And I'm Sherry Jennings.
We are so glad you're joining us for this journey, where we're going to share with you some of the things that we are most passionate about. They're things that have changed our lives and continue to transform us as we journey deeper into our stories, as we explore more of the heart of God, His kingdom, and our place in it, deepening our intimacy with God and with each other as we journey.
Robin, I am so loving journeying with you, with Dana, and all the women's team at Zoweh. Since returning from my first deepening weekend in 2010, this is the resource I've been waiting for. I've so wanted to share this with my friends, that goodness of my time away with God.
I also think of the deeper water of my own heart and soul that I want to be willing to enter into. I don't want to remain content with staying in the shallows.
What it did was it opened up a space for me to be real and authentic with the names that I've put on top of my heart, on myself, and to rewrite those stories in my heart, to go backwards. And so it allowed me to step closer to Jesus, to walk into His arms.
Practically speaking, each session consists of a video you'll watch together. Then you'll move into conversation with questions in the journal workbook, moving into deeper spaces together. So we are inviting you on the deepening journey, that you will experience and discover more of the heart of God and explore your own hearts and stories. As we do this, it's our hope and desire that your friendship and ours will deepen as we walk in this together.
Go to thedeepeningjourney.com for more details.
All right, so set the stage. When did that movie come out?
Early 2000s, maybe.
Okay, about Wilberforce, called Amazing Grace. Yeah, probably 2004 or 5.
Yeah.
So you're headed into the movie theater. You go see this movie.
Yeah.
Robin with you?
I say early 2000s. Early 2000s to us now, it could have been 2011. That still feels like, I think, giving it justice. When you said 04, 05, I was like, man, I think.
Wait, was it 20 years ago?
No, I don't think it was 20 years ago. I think it was maybe 8 or 10 years ago.
All right, I'll find out right now.
Okay.
I'll find out right now. But
so
2006.
It was 6.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And so, I'm I literally, SJ, in my timeline, in my story, in the larger story, I am moving. Rob and I are moving away from our assignment with Campus Crusade and towards Zoweh.
Yeah,
I am graduating seminary with the biblical counseling degree, and I am in this space of probably for 5 years. My heart had been moving away from campus at Duke and towards the hearts of men. So that's going on contextually. And I'm watching this.
Yeah.
And at the end, what happens is, as I'm just in tears, and
it's a moving story.
I wasn't the only one in tears.
No.
Let me probably declare that. But what were my tears about? And what I unpacked with Jesus was this name, this identity, right? As Jesus gives people in the scriptures new names, Simon becomes Peter, and Paul gets this cool nickname, or Peter gets this cool nickname, the Rock. He was the Rock before the Rock.
That's
and so
that's right, the original.
But yeah, Sons of Thunder, all that. So I hear
he's also the only disciple that carried a knife, by the way. Yeah.
And that's cool. So in that moment, Jesus is, what I hear in my heart is, you're my abolitionist.
Yeah.
And so, and it's what I wanted to be. I know that has racial realities to it.
That's what the movie's about.
Right. And I know that it's what I was longing to be. So in the desire of my heart, and in the film that I'm watching, and then in the encounter with Jesus, all of that is kind of colliding in one huge moment that story provides us. Often.
So how long was it between the moment where you see the light in the tool shed, you're my abolitionist, and you start to say, yeah, but, or, well.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Were you able to stay in it for?
Well, I think the deliberation, what I remember feeling immediately was an agreement and a connection with the longing of why I was leaving the role I was in to start another adventure in this thing that would be Zoweh. And, so there was a lot going on, churning and stirring, and this is kind of bringing that all together.
Already a lot of disruption.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it more fueled my my heart and Robin's to make the shift we were making than pause. And yet, there's levels of hesitancy even sharing the story sometimes, to your point about when did you think, really? Is that's kind of large. That's kind of, and some of those
could that be true?
Could that be true?
Yeah.
And so back to this, but the longing and the desire was there. So that's one of probably the great benefits, I think, of story is it can reveal and it can invite the revelation of what is it that you want? What is it that you're hopeful for?
Yeah.
So when I watch Man of Steel, I don't want to be Superman. I want to live with an S on my chest because S stands for hope.
Yeah.
Right. I don't want to be Maximus.
Right.
But I do want to be brave.
Yeah.
In the face.
I want to be a brotherly leader.
In the face of Commodus.
Right.
And I want to say to the men at the entrance of the Colosseum, how many of you have been in the army? How many have been in the military? We got a better chance if we stick together.
Right.
Those lines that have their parallel literally in Scripture. Love one another. Take care of each other.
Right?
Iron
sharpens iron.
Before one another, so they're all borrowing all the great stories that we're telling are borrowing from the great story that we're in.
Sure.
And why I think this is important to even talk about is because we want to close the distance between why you love Neo in the Matrix is because you're in a Matrix.
Right.
You are Neo. Maybe you're Morpheus in that story. And you're coming to see what the Matrix really is and what this fallen world can do and how unholy agents move and how they are set against you becoming who you are in the story. That's the story. And so when you identify with some of these characters, the pondering, the questions, the why, what is that really about?
Right. Back to why Jesus told stories and utilized parables, because I've been Neo.
Right.
I've been Morpheus.
Right.
I've been Cypher. I've been Mouse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And wants to go in with all the big guns and immediately gets killed.
Yes. If I'm really honest, I'm afraid. I'm honestly, I'd have to say, and I've been one of those characters that the agent just inhabits.
Yep.
And then, becomes, because in the film, the agent inhabits the guy in the corner down in the subway, and then he looks like the agent.
Right. Or the police officers.
That's right.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. But that they're really, the agents doing their worst, to assault
and using
control
those people. Yeah.
Yeah. So
and this isn't only. I didn't bring that up just because of The Matrix.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true in movies, other movies too, Gladiator and more recent ones too.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, you brought up the Lord of the Rings trilogy, such a big story, such a great story. And, there are betrayals, but there's betrayers, and even that character, unfortunately we can identify with when, it's Boromir, I think, who, doesn't think he's going to want the ring, is actually on the journey to protect Frodo as part of the Fellowship,
and yet,
and then he dies with the realization that he had crossed a line. But tell Frodo, I finished well.
Yeah, I see it.
But he's embarrassed and he's shamed and he's, talking to Aragorn in a way, I didn't do well.
Oh man.
It's just
I think about the little hobbit that touches the dead and then the helmet falls down the well. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Pippin.
Been that guy too.
Yeah. Gandalf's a little harsh with him right there.
He is.
But, that all of those characters, right? And that's the invitation. Are you the man that knows how to build your house on the rock?
Mm-hmm.
Or are you the man who builds it on the sand?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know until the storms come.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you been Stephen? Or have you been the one throwing the rocks?
Mm-hmm.
Have you been the woman at the well who's debilitated by her shame?
Yeah. And not really looking for a conversation around it at all.
Not at all.
She's trying to go at the least, and so those stories,
basically the worst time of the day to go to the well.
And so there's the parables like you're saying, and then there's the reality of, no, this is a woman who was unclean, or a woman who was caught in adultery, or a man who was blind. I mean, the line between, some of these parables and some of the realities of life and story, even in the scriptures, she's not a parable, but at the same time, right? She's a story.
She's a story, exactly.
And so those stories invite us to, and this is what the brilliance of The Chosen has been.
Mm-hmm.
They're telling this story in a fresh and new way. Some might say they're kind of taking liberties here and there. Well, how well do you know first century Caesarea and Jerusalem and Judea and the culture? You know, I think they've had some pretty good consultants on this project.
Right.
And so even the Roman roads, you know, and the Roman presence in The Chosen, I think a huge part of its magic is its authenticity, which is a part of a story that is really, really, really valuable.
Its relatability.
Yeah, good word.
Is what helps me so much as I watch it, you know?
Yeah.
So just going back to the story of your story with Amazing Grace and the abolitionist, it made me think of another story that you've told, and I think maybe we'll end this episode with a couple of our own stories of what we've experienced. But I think about one of the first moments you had where you heard the voice of God and the name he gave you and your response to that. Yeah. Because I don't know how much of our audience has heard that story.
Yeah. That's a very important story to me. And one that in early 2000s, we don't have to look this one up. I think it's like 2002, was when I was invited to, you know, learn about and sit in an audience that was learning and listening about the larger story and the significance and weightiness of being an image bearer, and that I was made for intimacy, connectedness with God, and that he wanted to speak. Yeah. That he wanted, that in any dear relationship, precious relationship, there is interaction.
Dialogue.
So, dialogue.
Yes.
And I hadn't had really, in my experience, hadn't had a lot of that with God. And there's reasons to that. And yet I find myself in a place outside, sitting in this landscape of, you know, a Colorado mountainside, and just wanting to hear God speak. Well, the first thing he brought to my attention was, well, you don't believe that I do. Right. So we had to take care of that first, that I had made some agreements that God was either mad or I wasn't good enough or that he didn't speak, you know, because I had heard that kind of growing up. I'd felt that growing up. So that needed to be remedied. But then we get into this question. So how do you see me? God, who am I to you? And the image that came up was the image of Aragorn. Because in that time, Lord of the Rings was going on. I obviously, for me anyway, I was a fan of the books, and I thought the series was maybe the second film. The Towers had come out, the Two Towers, but I was loving what I was seeing. I mean, bought the extended editions. Yeah. So here's this compulsion, and here's this engagement with story that I can't get enough in some ways. But now I'm not in a theater. I'm sitting in nature's theater. I'm outside asking God, how do you see me? And there's this Aragorn. You're my Aragorn. Well, Aragorn's kind of a troubled soul. He's in between. He's not playing the part that's actually his.
He's not operating out of his true self.
True self, right?
Would say, right?
Yes,
he's the ranger.
He's the ranger rather than the king of Gondor.
What's his name? Strider.
Yeah. But I loved him as a character. I loved who he was and the struggle he was in. So to be, literally we have in the corner, his swords. We have the sword of Strider, and then we have the sword that was reforged for the king of Gondor. Andriel, yes. And he's Elsildur's heir. So all of that, there's a lot going on, right? And a lot of it's backstory for sure. But for me, it was a weighty, weighty moment. And I doubted it. I literally thought, because I was new to this practice, and I thought my mind was just drifting somewhere rather than what's being captured is actually what I'm supposed to be able to see. So that story and my story are colliding. I'm kind of denying it. And I didn't forget about it, but I end up back home. And at that time, I interpreted it, SJ, as I must not know how to do this. This is frustrating. So the conference goes on. I go up to bat a few more times at this, listening to God, talking to God, and I'm swinging and missing. So I go home, and just a few weeks later, I'm 18 years ago or so. It's my 40th birthday, and I'm given a present by my wife, and it's a long box, and I think it's golf clubs or a shotgun. I think it's just one of those kind of boxes.
Either one would have been okay.
It would have been awesome.
Yeah.
Not that I'm great with either one of those things, so I need some new ones to practice. So so I open it up, and I swear, you can't make this shiz up. There's the sword of Aragorn, the Andriel,
the sword that was broken,
reforged.
that was reforged,
and it's the whatever United Cutlery, the replica. Thank you, replica of the sword. I mean, it's heavy and it's beautiful, and Robin says, "Is it okay?" I wasn't sure which one to get you, but I knew God had impressed on her to get me a sword.
Yeah.
So I had no advertisements from me. You know how you drop for your birthday that, hey, I'd love a size 11 and a half. So God was making not only good on that mountain side experience, but was affirming, through another one of his agents, another one of his image bearers, my wife, no, this is true. This is how I see you. This is where you are on your journey. You are overcoming and becoming. So when I say some of those things from the stage or, in a conversation with somebody about this is the journey that men are on, overcoming from their past and becoming, that's where the roots are, is in my own story. And that's how we often share.
Right. So great story. I love hearing it. I've heard it a bunch of times, but I love hearing it again, because what it makes me think of in this context is, as we land the plane on this episode, why, you just touched on it a little bit, but how would you share that story, and for what purpose, or not how would you share it, but for what purpose would you share that story to help other men?
Yeah.
Like, that's the point of these parables and stories that Jesus uses, right? So it can be relatable.
Yeah.
Because for sure, I'm answering my own question now. Yeah. For sure there's a guy in the audience that goes, man, I've never heard the voice of God. I don't know what that sounds like. I don't know how to engage with that.
Yeah.
And even if I did hear it, I'm not sure I would believe it.
Yeah.
And then you tell that story.
Yeah. And I know you can't deny that the stories that Jesus told, he knew his audience.
Oh,
and he was probably getting, multiple hits on multiple fronts, from the different hearts in their journey, So when he's talking about, the widow's mite, or he's talking about the building your house on, a firm foundation.
Three servants that were given
that's right.
coin.
Yeah. And even the disciples, right? They pull him aside shortly after, I think, the Sermon on the Mount and say, why all the stories?
Yeah.
You know?
What is up?
Yeah. It's kind of confusing. And,
yeah.
And the interesting thing is Jesus says to them in that passage, he says, well, you know, you're with me and you get it. Well, they really aren't getting it. You know, they really aren't getting it.
Yeah, he's speaking what he knows is going to be true at some point, right?
And so, and the stories that he tells, SJ, you know this, are very much about the kingdom and how it works, and giving people a place to land. And so, again, in this next session, in the next part of this parable series, it's going to be fun to interview you a little bit on some of your stories that have meant a great deal to you and why. And, you know, the hope is, as we end this, the real hope is that those things that you love, that you've seen or read about, the stuffed animals you got as a little boy or girl, you know, those when innocence was more true about you and naivety was more your privileged place. And then, you know, we move into the more dangerous reality of life outside the garden. But there's a reason. There's a reason why those are important stories. And it's your opportunity to journey with God and explore why.
Yeah.
And in there you'll find desire and want and hope and courage and, you know, identification, all of those things. And so as we finish this piece, that's the big question. What are you identifying with? And what's really cool about the Aragorn story and all the things that are in Aragorn's humanity that I'm identifying with, there's also this nobility and this these beautiful characteristics of Aragorn. Though he's struggling, here's this other package of courage and strength and for the hearts of others. His glory that point me to Jesus.
Right.
And I didn't have for too long, I didn't have that pointing. That all the great characters that I love and what I love about them are actually pointing to the one who loves me most.
Yep.
And that's why I want to be like those characters and come through and be courageous and be protective and be kind and be loving and be fierce. All of those characteristics are pointing me to the one character that I'm made in his image and to be. And so that's the beauty of talking about these parables. They're invitations if we can see them and hear them with the eyes and ears of our heart, right?
Yep.
Because story is the language of the heart.
Yeah. Yeah, I think of the number of people over the years that we've heard from, that's just like the disciples. Why so many movie clips at your weekend? Well,
yeah. And yeah.
It's a great question.
It's a great come and see. We got one coming up in May. Come and see. And,
That's right.
And connect the dots. Collect the dots and connect the dots.
Yeah,
so.
I love it. Well, this has been fun.
Looking forward to part 2.
Yeah, no doubt. If you've got questions, comments, certainly you can leave them in the comment section. That's kind of what it's there for. Also, you can email us, exploringmore@zoweh.org. Check out zoweh.org/events for our upcoming events. The King Me Book Tour is at kingmebook.com. You can find out information about that. Those events are going on. And yeah, we're a crowdfunded organization. So if you're interested in supporting us financially, zoweh.org/give.
Yeah. look forward to part 2. And thanks for being with us. We will see you next time on the Exploring More podcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoweh.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoweh on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoweh on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.